Don't just bring me stuff that's exactly like what you've been bringing for 20, 30 years. Bring some different things, some different perspectives.
The next intelligence failure won't be a collection failure. We will have had it. We will have had the data, but we didn't have the tools in place or the procedures in place to exploit it fast enough.
Take more risk. We literally want you to take more risk because we need you to move faster. And we're just willing to accept more mistakes and failure because we must move faster.
Kind of grapple with that trilemma. How do you integrate security but not have it squelch innovation? Welcome back to Intelligence at the Edge. I'm your host, Chip Usher. This week, I'm joined by Garrett Berntsen, who is with Accenture Federal Services. Garrett is the Defense and Intelligence AI and Data Lead and is the perfect person to talk about the challenges and opportunities that the federal government faces when trying to adopt AI technology at scale. Garrett has a distinguished public service record. He's a former U.S. Army officer. He served stints at the U.S. Department of State and the National Security Council and at the Pentagon, where he was responsible for developing AI policy at each of those institutions. Here's my conversation with Garrett. So Garrett Berntsen, welcome to Intelligence at the Edge. I am really glad to have you as our guest today to talk about data and AI and diffusion across the U.S. government.
Thank you, Chip. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So before we begin, you have a rather long job title. You are
kind of ridiculous.
the Defense and Intelligence Data and AI Lead for Accenture Federal Services.
That's right.
Can you tell us a little bit about what it is that you do?
Sure.
And a little bit more about what Accenture does across the federal government and the commercial space, et cetera.
Sure. So I'll start sort of most zoomed out. So Accenture proper is the world's largest services company. We are a really technology-focused services company, something like 800,000 people globally, 100 countries, something like that. And where I work, Accenture Federal Services is the federal arm of that sort of larger company. And we work every branch of government or every executive department, all kinds of places in the defense and intel community. So we kind of think of our business, based on our clients. And then we think about our business in terms of like what I'd say skill and capability areas. I run in the defense and intelligence portfolio all of our AI business. And so that can be, this is kind of the interesting thing about AI we're going to get into, I think, in this conversation. It touches so many different parts of what the federal government does. It's general purpose technology, right? We have people deploying workforce tools, just general workforce tools. We have people deploying, I would say, closer to the sort of mission edge in defense and intel. How do we use models? How do we leverage those for really mission-focused, tactical, computer vision, machine learning problems out of the edge? So it runs a huge gamut across, again, every agency and kind of lots of different use cases.
And does Accenture Federal do this all itself? Do you partner with other companies ever? How does that work?
Yeah, we, I think especially in the age of AI, partnerships is like one of the most important parts of being successful. In particular, we have really prioritized partnering with the big AI companies. You've probably heard of them, both the model companies themselves, the Google, the Anthropic, the OpenAI, whether it's using their software ourselves, which we do because we need our people to be more productive, or helping them go to market with clients. We also work with what I'd say the kind of next layer up on this is the platform companies, the people who have cutting edge software that may use AI, but is really more of that sort of, I would say, application and data layer. So we have a really growing partnership with Palantir. There's been some sort of news and press about that. I run that partnership for defense and intelligence. But we also work with, all of the big ServiceNow and Salesforce and Databricks, and I could name 100 other companies. But in this world like where we're trying to infuse AI into all kinds of the operations of the department and the intelligence community, you have to have the right software, and that software has to have access to the right data and the models to actually implement AI in people's workflows. And a lot of times it's us doing the integration of all of that is kind of how the term of art is sort of system integrator. We're integrating lots of different data sources, legacy, modern, into a sort of single unified solution for our customers.
And you yourself have experience in the national security enterprise.
Yeah.
Can you just briefly describe your personal journey? You started in the Army, then you went to state, the National Security Council, and the Pentagon, right?
Yeah, done a bunch of things. Been fortunate to have some great jobs, I'd say, in my career. I started as an Army officer. I was a transportation and logistics officer. It's funny looking back on your career, like when I was branched into a sort of combat arms, right? Logistics is a non-combat arms branch. It was like I thought the worst thing that could have ever happened to me in my entire life. To be given that sort of going to go drive trucks or whatever. I was pretty heartbroken, just to be honest. And it was probably one of the best things that could have ever honestly happened to me. I learned a ton about how the Army works. I still got to run and lead a platoon in combat in Afghanistan for a year, driving trucks around Afghanistan for 12 months. So I kind of got that experience, obviously. But then I also started to learn how basically how operational systems work. When you're a logistician, you're plugging into the logistics and the warehouse system, and you start to see it. And I experienced then a lot of issues with software, in particular out at the edge, where I had this sort of reputation for being the lieutenant or the logistician who made all these spreadsheets, just like an unlimited number of spreadsheets. And it's because the software we needed to do our job was just not accessible. And that was kind of, there's a spark there kind of for me, like how can we be the leading country in the world on technology? How can we be in the fight in the most, dangerous sort of circumstances? I can't even get like good technology in my hands right now. So I left. Anyway, that's a long way of saying I had a great experience in the Army in the 82nd Airborne Division. I went to grad school here in D.C., Johns Hopkins, SAIS. I did 5 or 6 years in consulting. I worked at Deloitte Consulting, now a competitor of mine, but a great company, worked there. And then I jumped back into government about 6 years ago. I joined the State Department, a great team there, standing up a data and AI program in the State Department. We like to say a startup inside of the country's oldest cabinet agency. Started by Thomas Jefferson, now doing AI, right? It was a fun dynamic there. I did about 9 months on the NSC, working on technology and national security. I worked on the AI executive order. And then most recently, I left about a year at the CDAO, the Chief Digital and AI Office for the Department of Defense.
Fantastic. Well, you've gone from driving trucks to driving AI integration across U.S. government. Fantastic. Well, let's get into it. And how do you see, or how does Accenture see the potential for AI and big data to have impact across the defense and the intelligence sectors?
Yeah, I think, the common refrain here that I try to give is like, I think we're just starting to even understand what the impact is going to be in government. But I think initial signs are it is going to fundamentally change how we work, basically across the gamut of activities that we work on. How quickly we can drive that adoption is the question. Not will the change happen? Can we do it fast enough is in my view kind of the real question. Can we drive adoption without users actually using these tools on their day-to-day jobs? We're just buying technology, which is not what we want. We need to drive outcomes and impact. So my take is, I think it's pretty well trodden. I'm not the first one to come up with this idea, but I think it's apt. This is like a general purpose technology like electricity that there's going to be all kinds of innovation forthcoming on, we never even thought about using it for this thing. The obvious things right now are basic workflows, I'm writing a document, or I'm making PowerPoint slides. But it's only going to, I think, move up the value chain into more physical issues, autonomy, true autonomy for weapon systems, for logistics. I think that is sort of the curve that we're on.
So, my conversations with people in the intelligence community, over at the Pentagon, down on the Hill, other civilian agencies, I kind of get both stories. There's some real pockets of innovation. People are adopting it and trying to advance it pretty quickly. But there's still large swaths of the bureaucracy that, yes, they're aware of AI. They've tried it at home, but it's not impacted their day-to-day, the workflows, as you talked about.
Yeah.
What are the key impediments to adoption that you see?
Yeah, we have 30 minutes or 45 minutes. There's a lot. It is a hard problem. I think it's good for us because there's a lot of work to be done, but it is a hard problem. I'll start with, I think, a few almost sort of counterintuitively. It is people and change management is actually the hardest part of all of this. If you could deploy tools to people right now, and some people are getting access to some of these tools, you're not just going to magically get adoption, and you're not going to just magically get efficiencies and outcomes. There's a big study, I know it's probably really well covered in the news, this MIT study that 95% of use cases didn't meet ROI, or some study like that. There's two ways to look at that. One is we should just throw this thing out. It's not useful. The other is, well, let's study those 5% and evaluate what they're getting. And I think for teams that are really adopting this, they are seeing huge returns on investment. And so how do we facilitate that? So I think people first challenge, and some of that is status quo bias of just people are used to what they're used to. There's been a lot of innovation and change, and so people are constantly adopting and adapting to new things. There's training to be had, but there's also just some honest realities about the civil service and our government employees, which is these are not my stats. We have the, on average, oldest workforce we've ever had, and there's lots of awesome things about that. That's not all bad, but in certain areas that does lead to challenges for adopting new technology. I think we just have to be honest about that. And so initiatives to add in new workers to the workforce, really tech-forward hiring, skills-based hiring, which has been sort of a unique thing. I think both administrations have actually, the last administration and the first Trump administration, there were some skills-based hiring initiatives. Seem open to that is a big piece of it. And then, of course, you get into the actual technology, which there still are huge challenges. There are efforts ongoing to accelerate the pace with which we can authorize new software into these environments. Rightfully so. There should be a high bar if you're going to work on a national security network. You can't have vulnerable software on these networks, right? This is not your average, no company wants a data spill, but it's a different thing to lose someone's, credit card data than it is to lose someone's social security number or national security information that could lose, someone could lose their life. So there is a high bar, and there should be a high bar, but we need to pour resources and change the policy to make that faster. We need to get that software accessible to all parts of the federal bureaucracy, federal workforce, and there are efforts to do that. We'll see. I think there's some new rules coming out. It's called FedRAMP. It's the process to sort of accredit new software. There's some new rules forthcoming. The last thing I'll say is really at the data layer, where we have a new company, a startup gets to start from scratch and manage their data and do it in the cloud and be optimized. This is the advantage of a startup, right? Second or third mover advantage. You don't make the mistakes from before. Federal government just doesn't get to do that. We have mainframes from the 40s and the 50s, and you don't get to just leapfrog, and move to something else. And so there will be a lot of work at the data layer to migrate into modern architecture and to connect systems in a way that people maybe are a little uncomfortable about, they have concerns about, and that is just going to take work and leadership sort of initiative.
I'm really glad that you brought up the issue of data, and I want to come back to that in a minute. But first, let's talk a little bit about how Accenture views testing and evaluation, sort of assuring the security and the reliability of these systems, because it seems to me, and I come at this as a former U.S. government user, that the stakes are high. If you're working in intelligence or defense, people's lives really can be at stake. Classified information, the nation's secrets, the nation's security. So it really matters that these things work, and it
matters a lot.
It's fair to say that there may be an older workforce that's maybe a little hidebound, but they're working within a system that's effective, right?
Yep.
At least so far. Now, to realize gains through AI, they have to have some assurance that these new tools are actually going to work. So how much effort does Accenture put forward on testing, evaluation, persuading people that these are actually secure and effective?
Right. Yes, great question. First and foremost, we work for the federal government. Right. So when we are deploying models, when we're deploying AI into their environments, it is with clear guidance and partnership with the federal government, because all companies are somewhat going to be concerned if they're not going to just let loose AI on a workforce, right, without partnership and buy-in from the government. So we do it hand in hand with our government. What we do internally is we have our own guidelines for how we think about risk around AI. And so even if a government client said, turn on a model to do some really risky thing that would impact lives, human life, it could be a military use case, or it could be like making a health decision or something about someone, we have our own internal protocols to evaluate whether we think that that's sufficient, like how much review we need that on that use case. You could think about it on a spectrum. If we're deploying a model to help someone write a memo, and we know there's a lot of different overview of that memo, and it's kind of a workforce use case, there's less risk. If we're talking about full-on autonomy, we're deploying into a weapon system, that is going to take more review, even internally, to evaluate how much risk we think is there. I also think that it's worth just being humble about the fact that the sort of AI test and evaluation world is being built as we're flying this plane. There are teams at DoD, OSD in particular, my old team, who are doing great work understanding what are the benchmarks. How do we even benchmark this problem? There's Scale AI is pretty famous for creating these benchmarks, and there's other like LLM benchmarking efforts, but there's no benchmark for intel analysis or, again, autonomy, just to use really extreme examples, right? So they're going to have to come up with frameworks to think about this, and they're going to have to create entirely new physical ranges to do autonomy testing or digital sort of test and evaluation environments. You can do some of this testing in like an actual, I know it sounds great, like a metaverse, actually. You can sort of do some of that test and evaluation there. There's also companies that are being stood up that are taking this problem on. So, industry also doesn't want to make these mistakes. These large language model, these AI companies want to get it right too. They're concerned about the risk to themselves. And so they have their own frameworks on how they think about risk and the tolerance of testing. And we need to learn from that as much as we can. It's not a one-for-one, because they're not doing, they're not taking as much risk inherently if they build a chat bot for fun as we might be. but they're still doing that sort of test and evaluation. There's a huge research community sort of trying to figure that out and comparing across models. There's companies. There's a company called Brain Trust, and they look at how models operate. They actually use an LLM to evaluate how LLMs work.
Fascinating.
It's crazy. Yeah, they'll give a prompt or a set of complex actions in an agentic, and then sometimes they actually did a live demo. I was at a demo they did, and like just calling out one company just for the example, it was like the Anthropic model evaluated the Anthropic workflow harder than it did the other models. Like it wasn't biased pro itself, which I found super interesting. Yeah. Not that it should be, but it was just kind of a fascinating thing. You're using one model to the same model to evaluate the outcome of it.
You're always hardest on yourself.
Yeah, maybe that's the case. The last thing I would say is for us personally as a company, when we think about risk, you have to really evaluate how that risk actually, or how that use case actually is executed from end to end. And so I'll kind of give a practical example. This was not something I did at Accenture, but this was something I did in government. When we first launched a really widely accessible chat app at the State Department, there was a lot of concern that someone would be writing a memo with this thing. It's called State Chat is the product. And they would get some erroneous information, and then they would give it to the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State would get a hallucination. And there was genuine concern of that. I mean, people were like, well, it hallucinates. It's wrong. We can't trust it. And we kind of were in this meeting. I remember we were like, my boss maybe said, but people are going to review this memo, right? How many people review a memo before it goes to the Secretary of State? And you've worked in IC. Hundreds of people will review this memo, So in the framework of this thing will go to the secretary, he'll have bad info, that seems really risky. If you actually understand the whole workflow, it's not risky at all because there'll be a ton of different reviews. And so you have to understand these use cases from end to end. In the Defense Department, there's guidelines on human in the loop for a lot of these things. And so if you have that full process view, you can say, well, maybe this went from really high risk to medium, risk.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the data issue.
Sure.
And we have a bit of a challenge here. We've got to make data interesting.
Yeah.
But I think it's critical. And I'll give you a little bit of my theory of the case.
Yeah, please.
Which is informed by my background. When I started in the intelligence community back in the 90s, early 90s, I was impressed with the amount of intelligence information that we had to work with, but it was very stovepiped, right? I mean, you had your SIGINT reports, embassy and State Department reporting, a little bit of open source, some clandestine and other things. And you as an analyst, you were the processing unit that took all that information in.
And you're swivel chairing, right, from one thing to another, opening one screen to another.
Very discrete stovepipes. And I think that began to evolve later in the 90s and then really accelerated after 9/11. We created fusion centers, the counterterrorism center at CIA, working groups that brought in all the stovepipes, but within the confines of intelligence.
Yeah.
And then later, we really began to add in more and more outside, open source, commercially available or publicly available information. Right. For me, that pivot moment was the Arab Spring and Russia-Ukraine conflict, part one, back in 2014. But now that vast, open universe of data has just become a total tsunami. And I think the real promise of AI is it will help us kind of face that tsunami of information. But I think it's going to require sort of a different approach or different relationship between the intelligence community, at least, and data. And that vast data sphere, if you're a brand new company, as you said a few minutes ago, sure, you can sort of build your data sets, integrate them, make sure they can all talk together. But the intelligence community, the Department of Defense, as you said, there are a lot of There's a lot of old reporting. There's a lot of legacy systems. There's a lot of compartmentation. How does Accenture advise government clients about what it is that they need to do, what techniques or strategies to kind of harness this vast data sphere for AI?
Yeah. I'll use kind of your explanation, actually, I think, as kind of a frame for it, because I think if we think back historically on why so much of these fusion centers and stuff were stood up, this is not a secret. I mean, it's, the 9/11 report said, hey, we actually had some of these pieces here and we didn't connect these pieces. And maybe we're overly, stovepiping, right? And so that's obviously a very tragic, and hopefully we don't have to have a kind of moment of that scope and scale to drive change. But I think there's a valuable lesson there, and we tried to use this to some degree in government, which is find the really frustrating problem that you don't even have to explain to someone as a data problem. It's like you almost don't even have to mention it. Just hey, we're doing staffing planning, and we don't know where all our people are. And the senior person's like,
happens all the time.
What do you mean? What do you mean we don't know where all our people are? That is a data problem. You don't have to even say it. Just we don't actually have a system that tells us where everybody is, and we don't, or it's not updated or whatever. And the executive's like, well, we got to solve that problem. I need to know where everybody is so that we can do great staff planning, or I can reprioritize or whatever. And then you say, okay, just FYI, sir, ma'am, that's a data problem, and we're going to need to solve that, and I need your help kind of signing off on getting me some new technology and some access to the data. And they're like, how can that be a data problem? You're like, I'll handle the data part of it. Don't worry. But latching on to a key problem that you kind of know an executive will just buy in on needing to, and it has to have a real mission outcome, obviously. That is the best way to drive transformation. I think what a lot of people, I don't want to criticize. I think it's important to do the build a data strategy and how to data governance. And there's all of these policy things that people do. I'm not poo-pooing that. I did some of that too. I wrote a data strategy for what it's worth while I was in government, and ran a data governance board. So I get it. That's secondary and tertiary, in my view, to solving actual problems for people. And you get traction from governance and policy post facto. People think it actually is the other way around. I'll write a data strategy. I'll do some data governance, and then people will give me their data and we'll solve problems. It's the opposite direction. And it's a hard thing because most people in government are policy people. They write papers and they sit on working groups and stuff. That is just a lot of the work. I've also done that work in government. It's just different kind of work. Technologists are like, I want to build a thing. I want to build something. I want to solve a problem. And you kind of need people who can wear both hats, who can try to use the levers of governance and policy and budget to actually deliver technology solutions. So, we have this sea and ocean of just huge volumes of data. Mm-hmm. If you focus in this use case kind of model, one, I think it makes it easier to succeed. The second is you prioritize what actually matters, because in that sea of data, actually probably 70% is not going to be useful, ever, probably. Okay. You don't have to get you don't have to get everything organized. And so use that forcing function of a serious problem to get the most important data squared away.
So let's talk a little bit about security and data next. Because again, drawing on my own experience, there tended to be three tribes that didn't always get along or speak each other's language. You had users, you had the technologists, so the S&T people or the IT people who were bringing in capabilities, and then you had your security people. And a lot of times progress and innovation was stymied by security concerns. And so maybe drawing from your experience in the private sector, how do companies like Accenture or the ones that you work with kind of grapple with that trilemma? How do you integrate security but not have it squelch innovation?
Yeah. I do find I've been in and out of government a couple times, and I do find it funny sometimes that we in government are often like, well, industry must have this totally figured out. Everyone can get access to all the data they need, and they have all the technology. And of course, I think in industry, yeah, we have made more progress, but they face the same dilemmas. To your point, it's not like that dilemma goes away. Especially if you're working in federal contracting where you have to certify your systems and compliance and all that stuff. So it is a hard problem whether you're in government or whether you're in industry. And if you're listening right now and you're in government, just know you're in the same boat as people, in industry. I think in government in particular, the challenge is the incentives are kind of just off. They're totally off in my view. There is no like a CISO, who manages security of a system, or a CIO. They don't really get what I'd call like the rewards or the kudos or the upside that they should get if they deliver some new system. It's sort of just like, great, thanks. If they have any problems.
Oh, it's both feet on their heads, right?
Correct. The downside is enormous. And so people follow incentives, and risk aversion is in a lot of these situations a logical response to the incentives that we have. And so I think, what would be nice, or, thinking outside the box a little bit is almost just saying, and actually I think this administration honestly right now is saying some of this, which is like, take more risk. We literally want you to take more risk because we need you to move faster. And we're just willing to accept more mistakes and failure because we must move faster. Now, yet to be seen if under this current framework, if someone makes a mistake that they're not also fired, or what you'd want is someone to push you to really accelerate and then have your back if there's an error, right? In good faith, obviously. That would be what the ideal. But I think that's kind of what I think we need to really accelerate is more accountability for actual execution. And that means truly being able to show that you are delivering new capability, digital capability in particular, fast, and a little bit more top cover to move fast from a security standpoint.
Yeah, it seems to me, and I've heard others say this, that with all this open source information coming in, the next intelligence failure won't be a collection failure. We will have had it.
Yeah.
We will have had the data, but we didn't have the tools in place.
Yeah.
Or the procedures in place to exploit it fast enough.
I mean, this is really more up your lane as an intelligence expert and longtime career agency person. That's a hard I almost want to turn the mic back on you and ask you the question. It's a cultural challenge of open source in the Intel community that, to my earlier points on like what is needed to transform, some of it is just cultural of needing Intel officers and analysts to say, I'm willing to take this video from Twitter or X or whatever over some other reporting. That's a hard cultural, whether you got that data or not, it's a hard cultural problem. People are really used to, well, I got this off some unique, Qmint or SIGINT or whatever. So anyway, I don't know if you want to talk about that, but it's just a hard cultural challenge.
No, it definitely is. I mean, I think there's a preference for secrets that is just persistent.
Yep.
But I also think it takes leadership from the seventh floor of whatever department or agency you're talking about, where they've got to demand going fast and kind of follow through and ensure the bureaucracy is following through on that managed risk taking that you're talking about.
Yeah, and the last administration too, under Secretary Blinken, he was a very active supporter of using data and AI. And just your comment makes me remember he said to us, and he said to the group, like, what does the data say? Like, you need to ask that question. What does the data say? It doesn't have to completely change your analysis, but you should be considering that. And he said that, widely. And of course, once he said that, we were like we told everyone that. We made like a T-shirt, of it or whatever, because it was like a big deal, for our team was kind of as a scrappy data science team to tell these diplomats, like, you should be looking at this, So I only raise that as another example of there's to some degree this transformation is so hard that there must be advocates at a senior level who say, I want this. Don't just bring me stuff that's exactly like what you've been bringing for 20, 30 years. Bring some different things, some different perspectives. And that is going to help drive change, obviously, too.
Yeah, I mean, I worry that there's been a proliferation that started under the Biden administration of chief AI officers. And that's important and necessary, but I do worry that may be where you park the problem and you don't have the top leadership actually driving that change. We'll have to see.
Yeah.
So we talked a lot about the challenges and some of the problems. Any success stories, either across the federal government or across other parts of the domestic scene here in the United States or internationally? Where are you seeing AI adoption really making a difference in an industry that otherwise wasn't using it?
Yeah. I'll speak first kind of internally in our own business. I mean, we've launched internal tools that pull from our corporate data they just accelerate your productivity at a level. I went from, it's funny, I'm kind of like a test case. I did 5 years in government where I had almost no AI tools. Right. And meanwhile, everyone was getting them. And then I pop out and I'm like, whoa, this is just, so I got this kind of very, A/B test between the two markets very quickly because I've only left government 5-6 months ago. It's everywhere. I mean, I'm chatting, I'm saying, hey, can you pull up, in our knowledge base, is there any prior work we did with this client or in this area? And what would take me an email or looking through a SharePoint for 4 hours, I just have, and I can just get it and get smart on it. So internally, we're using it a lot for those types of knowledge management, get smart on, on things. That for us also, of course, because we're technologists and we deliver so much software development, just the power of these software coding capabilities is pretty mind-blowing. The last time I worked in industry, I did learn to code myself. I taught myself programming. I wasn't very good at it, I'll admit, but enough to be dangerous and, have to click through Substack a million times for errors and whatever. That's sort of over. I mean, you just don't even need to, you can just type a chat and just get yourself code. You should probably have a senior engineer look at it before you push it to prod, but you can go way faster, I think, than anyone could have imagined 5 years ago. And so those internal tools are huge. We need to get those tools into government. There is a ton of just legacy code that sitting on old servers that's probably, a cyber risk more so than anything else. And we really need to modernize a lot of that. And these code assist tools, I think, are going to really help with that. So that's an example that, to be clear, is already happening in government. We're already seeing modernization of these old legacy software into more modern software frameworks that are lower cyber risk, that are cheaper, and that are more efficient for the government. So that's I think a really good use case. I'll go back to the example I shared kind of at the State Department that is both a productivity tool, these access to these large language models. I think the whole department has access to them. They have thousands of active users. I think the number one use case early was people improving their performance evaluation write-ups.
Happening at other places as well.
I'm sure, yeah. On that, it was funny because we got a lot of pushback on that initially of people using it for that purpose. And when we talked with our users, though, they just said, please don't tell us we're not allowed to do this. This is just such a productivity gain. And it just reminds me that, like, when you apply AI to these processes, sometimes what you realize is actually the process itself is probably kind of a suboptimal process. You learn that actually just a writing exercise is the best way to evaluate talent and how well people did is just maybe not the best sort of thing. You're just kind of basically saying whoever can write the best write-up about themselves, whether it's true or not, is the best way to pick talent. So you kind of learn some underlying systemic problems when you just turn on these AI capabilities that everyone has access to. But anyway, so those are a couple use cases. I'd say in the Defense Department, in this forum, the work they're doing on fusing common operating pictures with AI across a lot of different data to give commanders sort of what they need to have access to see the sort of battlefield in real time is pretty incredible. And that is a capability that commanders have wanted for a long time. And it's being done through a lot of hard sort of engineering work, a lot of investment from many partners at different classification levels. And I think will and is already changing the way that we look and fight, every day. So.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
It strikes me we should have you back maybe in a year, something like that, after we see some of the impacts of this kind of early stage of AI transformation to see how it's driving organizational change. Because I think you're absolutely right. When you apply AI, you begin to question, well, is this process the process of the future? Or do we need to eliminate some layers, eliminate some roles, create some new ones? Yep. And I think everyone's just beginning to see that on the horizon.
Yeah.
This has been great. Yeah, I would like to end with a question that I like to ask all of my guests, and that is, if you had one piece of advice for a young person out there, maybe in college or in grad school, who's thinking about joining government and getting into defense, national security, or intelligence, what would that piece of advice be?
Yeah, good question. I think I'll give two. I'll maybe cheat the question. I think, look, like the fundamental skills of being a professional, of I would almost call the sort of basic business skills of communicating. Yes, still writing, I think, is super, super important. Whether you're using Write Assist, an AI assistant or not. Problem solving and breaking down problems into pieces, following through, and then working on a team. Those things, I think this future of we're just going to have an army of bots and, we won't even have to talk to another human just to be incredibly productive. I kind of think the opposite might be true, which is once we have done all of these tasks with bots that are really, that bots are good at, we're going to need people who can talk to each other and communicate and make connections and problem solve, because you can have every bot in the world, but convincing people to do things or leading or partnering or building relationships, you just have to gain those skills. So it's almost like the non-technical stuff, really focus on that, learn those skills, double down on communication, double down on building relationships, and learn that side of the house. And then the obvious, answer as an AI guy is you do need to learn to use these tools and build them into your sort of day-to-day, so you understand how they work, how they can impact your colleagues, what they're good at, what they're not good at. They're not good at everything. It is often that I talk with people, clients or whatnot, and I try to ask, what do you use AI for, or what do you do? Some people just say no, nothing at all, That's kind of a challenge, honestly, because they don't have to use it all the time. They don't have to be super users and vibe code and all this stuff, but you have to have some awareness of what these tools can do, because the change is coming, and you want to be someone who at least understands them and sort of knows how they operate. So soft skills, I think, are still going to be maybe even more important, and then usage of these capabilities, is the other hand.
Great advice, and
thank you.
Thank you for sharing your perspectives. Garrett Berntsen, Accenture Federal Services. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Chip. Appreciate it.